Friends, in John chapter 5, we read a fascinating story about a man who's been paralyzed for 38 years. And we find him lying next to the pool of Bethesda, which was believed to have had healing powers. But the proviso was that you needed to be first in when the waters stirred. We read that he had no one to help him in. And so someone else would always get in ahead of him. The story sounds hauntingly similar to trying to phone in to get an appointment at the local doctor's surgery. Who can get in there first is the question. Jesus, seeing the man, asks him an interesting question. Do you want to be made well? Why does Jesus ask that question? Surely after 38 years of being afflicted by his ailment, the man surely wants to be made well. Surely everyone wants to be made well. But in the story, Jesus seems to have a deeper insight into our humanity. If truth be told, not everyone necessarily always wishes to be made well. Growing up in South Africa, it was a common thing to see people begging on the streets. Unemployment in South Africa was and is high because there just are not enough jobs to go around. It is extremely rare to see a sign outside of a business indicating a vacancy. It was one of the things that really shocked Wend and I when we first arrived here in the UK. Jobs were and are freely available. They may not always pay well, but they are always there for the taking. Not so in South Africa. If you have even a very low-paying job, you are one of the lucky ones. And there is also little to no real social support for the unemployed and those who have disabilities. Today, if you had a disability in South Africa, you would receive a maximum of around the equivalent of £100 per month as a disability grant. During the apartheid years, things would have been even worse if you were a person of color. Growing up in South Africa in a town called Pinetown, which was a little larger than perhaps than the size of Banbridge, I remember a man who used to sit in the main street begging. He had what is commonly called elephantitis. His one leg was swollen large, a bit like an elephant's, and it had rough nodules or warts on it that often looked raw and constantly oozing with fluid and blood. It was really quite unpleasant to see, and also not a very pleasant thing to smell when walking past. I struggled to imagine what it was like for the man himself. Interestingly, at some point, we heard that someone in the community had offered to pay so that he could get his leg medically treated. Now, during apartheid in South Africa, the healthcare system was deeply segregated and discriminatory, with people of color facing significant challenges in accessing medical care. Unexpectedly, we heard that he had declined the offer to receive medical treatment. One can only speculate what his reasons might have been, but probably first among them was that prospects of financial security with a healthy leg were in fact less favorable for him, and by implication for his family, than if his leg was left untreated. Would he even be able to get a job in a country where jobs, especially for the lowest paid, are scarce? And if he got a job, would he ever earn as much money for his family if he was made well? It's a distressing story, but it does illustrate the fact that Jesus' question to the man in John 5 was and is, in fact, quite insightful. As human beings, we don't always want to get well, whether that be physically or emotionally, because sometimes there is a payoff of one kind or another in remaining unwell. And that takes us to the 6th step on the 12-step program. Over the course of October and November last year, we were exploring the 12-step program, and we got up to step 5. Just a quick recap of those first 5 steps might be helpful. In step 1, we were invited to identify that one issue or struggle in our lives that we feel powerless over, that makes us feel like our lives are unmanageable. And interestingly, just this week, I heard on the BBC News or the chat show that many young people in the UK today feel powerless over social media, that they're addicted to it and they feel powerless over it. It has a power over them. In step 2, we were invited to consider the possibility of a higher power that can restore us to health, balance, and sanity. And some might call that higher power God. Others might call it their higher self. Others who are not conventionally religious might speak of the universe as their higher power. In step 3, we were invited to hand over the care of our wills and our lives to that higher power, or God as we understand God. In step 4, we were then invited to take a moral inventory of ourselves, listing as honestly as possible our virtues as well as our weaknesses. In step 5, we were invited then to admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And today in step 6, we are invited to ask ourselves the question, if we are entirely ready now to have our character defects removed. In essence, the 6th step is asking the same question that Jesus asks the paralyzed man. Do we want to be made well? What paralyzes you? Do you want to be made well? It sounds quite passive, asking God to remove our character defects from us. But that wording is important in the 12-step program, because in step 1, we admitted that we were powerless over some part of our lives. In other words, we had tried, but we had failed in trying to change. Sometimes we have dysfunctions that go deeper than our ability to change them ourselves. Sometimes we need help. Perhaps we need help more often than we would like to admit. But the bottom line of step 6 is the question that Jesus asks the paralytic. Do you want to be made well? Do we really want to change? Are we entirely ready to have our dysfunctional thinking or dysfunctional behavior or both changed? In other words, the bottom line is simple. Change begins with a willingness and a desire, a deep desire to do so. How willing are we? How much do we desire it? Am I entirely ready to have my character defects removed, or have I grown quite attached to them? Trevor Hudson makes the point that being entirely ready to have one's character flaws removed does not mean that we are going to suddenly wake up and become perfect people. Far from it. He reminds us that even the Apostle Paul, the author of much of the New Testament, battled with his weaknesses right up to the day he died. He says it goes without saying that to be human is to be imperfect. We grow and mature throughout our lives. But what it means to be entirely ready to have our character defects removed means that we are fully prepared to give up any destructive pattern of thought or behavior that is stopping our spiritual progress and perhaps causing chaos in our lives. And thus it is a statement of our openness and our willingness to change. Trevor Hudson gives an illustration. He asked the question, what is the first thing that we need to do if we wish to buy a new car? Some might suggest going to a local car dealership or looking online for car sales websites. But he suggests that before we even start doing these things, right at the outset, we first need to be entirely ready to give up driving the old car. Only then will we really be able to start out on the journey towards acquiring a new one. He says it is exactly the same when it comes to wanting to change ourselves. We can only change when we are entirely ready to do so. Dr. Phil, however, suggests that often we hang on to our dysfunctional behavior and thinking because we get some kind of payoff or reward for it. Perhaps we are attached to our dysfunctions because they give us an excuse not to grow. Perhaps growing can feel like an overwhelming task. Perhaps we're attached to our dysfunctions because through them, we hope to receive sympathy from others. Or perhaps we hang on to them because they might be familiar to us and provide us with a sense of comfort and security. Change can be uncomfortable and uncertain, and we're not quite sure what it is going to ask of us. We have a fear of the unknown. Others might hang on to their dysfunctional behavior and thinking because of denial and a lack of awareness of just how destructive our dysfunctions really are. For others, there may be some sort of short-term benefits in dysfunctional thinking and behavior, such as a temporary escape from stress or discomfort, which may lead us to prioritize immediate relief over long-term well-being. For others, there may be social reinforcement. We fear criticism or rejection from others if we were to change. And sometimes our friends and family members are invested in us remaining the way we are. They don't always want us to change because it might mean change for them too. Sometimes we resist changing our dysfunctional behavior because we just haven't yet learned healthier alternatives, and we don't even know what those might look like. And so there are a whole lot of reasons why we are not always entirely ready to give up our character defects or dysfunctional thinking and behavior. And so how can we get to this point? What if we are still very attached to our dysfunctional patterns of thinking and behavior? Trevor Hudson suggests perhaps 4 things that might help us. Firstly, he suggests that we can begin to imagine what life might look like if we did change. How might my life be positively different if my dysfunctional patterns were removed? A positive picture of the future can inspire us to change in the present. Secondly, we can think about the pain that our character defects cause to ourselves and others. What impact do my dysfunctional patterns and character defects have on others, especially those that I might love and cherish? How might their lives be different if I was different? Thirdly, we can consider what the future might look like if we do not let go of our character defects and dysfunctions. How bad might things get? Who or what might I lose if I stubbornly refuse to give up my dysfunctional behavior and thinking? And then lastly, if we are still not entirely ready to change, Trevor suggests that we ask God or our higher power, or even our higher self, to create within us that desire. What's interesting about step 6 is it's not yet a step in which we actually engage in trying to change ourselves. It's not even a step in which we ask God or our higher power to change us. That will be left for step 7. Step 6 is the prior step, where we are invited to consider if we really want to change. In the words of Jesus, do I want to be made well? We're not talking physically here. We're really talking about a wellness of the spirit. Do I really want to be made well in my spirit and in my relationships? May God bless you with that food for thought. Amen.